Welcome, dear listeners, to a tale that will chill you to your very core. A story of untold secrets, restless spirits, and the haunting depths of the world's oldest and deepest lake, Lake Baikal. Imagine being surrounded by an endless expanse of thick ice, so clear and pristine that it reflects the star-studded sky above like a perfect mirror. The silence is deafening, the cold biting deep into your bones. But you are not alone out there on that frozen tundra. Strange, unnatural noises begin to reverberate across the glassy surface, indiscernible whispers that raise the hairs on the back of your neck, a low, guttural moan that seems to emanate from the frigid depths below the ice itself. Then, movement in your peripheral vision catches your eye. Shadowy shapes materialize in the distance, drifting towards you with dreadful purpose. Pale, twisted forms taking on a human-like appearance. But are they truly human? You attempt to run, but the slick ice betrays you, rooting you to the spot. The spirits of the ancient lake are all around you now, their icy breath freezing the very air you breathe. What secrets lie beneath the haunted ice? What terrible forces have awoken to guard this frozen realm? Turn off the lights, lock your doors, and listen closely as our tale unfolds on the haunted ice of Lake Baikal. The legend of Lake Baikal stretches back into the mists of time immemorial. This colossal rift, formed by the rending of the Earth's crust, plunges over a mile into the planet's depths. From the moment humans first laid eyes upon its vastness, a primal dread took root. The indigenous peoples spoke in hushed tones of malevolent forces dwelling within the lake's fathomless chasms. They called it the sacred sea, and believed its waters were inhabited by spirits and deity-like creatures known as the Khozryain, the true masters and keepers of Baikal. Any who dared defile the lake risked drawing the wrath of these primordial guardians. Tales are told of entire villages being swallowed by the earth, consumed by giant whirlpools that erupted without warning, of lone hunters vanishing on the shores, their bodies never to be seen again. Eerie, human-like cries echoing across the desolate waters on moonless nights. Perhaps most chilling were the unfortunate few who claimed to have perceived shadowy forms moving beneath the ice. Twisted, humanoid shapes drifting in the darkness, their battered faces pressed against the transparent surface, as if gasping for air that never came. For centuries, the Khozryain and their domain were to be feared, and left undisturbed at all costs. But the modern age would bring intrepid explorers and scientists whose curiosity could not be dissuaded by mere legend and superstition. Soon, the first expeditions onto the frozen lake would begin. Little did these unsuspecting sojourners know that the jealous guardians were watching and waiting to punish those who dared trespass on their hallowed realm of haunted ice. The year was 1956, in the midst of the Cold War's escalating tensions. A joint team of Russian and American scientists proposed an unprecedented expedition to establish a research station on the frozen surface of Lake Baikal itself. Their goal was to plumb the secrets of the ancient Rift Lake through an ambitious study of its unique geology, biology, and climatic influences. What they could not have anticipated were the primordial secrets still lurking beneath the haunted ice. Assembling a highly trained crew of researchers, engineers, and support staff, the expedition launched from the lakeside town of 𝗪𝗸𝗶𝗀𝗍 in the depths of the Siberian winter. After arduous days of hauling equipment over the frozen expanse, they reached the ideal site directly over the lake's most profound depths. With a thunderous crack that echoed for miles, the drills pierced through 5 feet of solid ice. Quickly, prefabricated structures were raised and secured to create the Baikal Ice Camp, home to the elite team of 24 scientists and support staff for the next 6 months. As the camp took shape under the glow of the aurora borealis, more than one crewman remarked on an uncanny feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were scrutinizing their every move. When night fell, phantom voices and inexplicable noises frequently drifted in from the vast darkness surrounding the camp, dismissing them as nothing more than the ice cracking and groaning. The work proceeded at a feverish pace until one fateful night when the drilling team's sensors began to wildly fluctuate. Strange, amorphous shapes emerged on the radar screens, moving just below the ice, directly underneath the camp's location. A decision firmly separating fantasy from reality now confronted the expedition's scientists. Should they abandon years of planning and hard-won funding based on phantoms and local folklore? Or would they tempt fate by delving deeper into the haunted lake's archaic secrets? The scientists' initials bravado in the face of local legends soon faltered as the eerie phenomena plaguing the Baikal ice camp intensified. What began as sporadic noises and subtle vibrations quickly escalated into a waking nightmare. The first fractured accounts came from the night crew monitoring the sensors and drilling operations. Shrieking static burst across the radio frequencies, segueing into indistinct voices moaning in unknown languages. When the technicians killed the power sources, the garbled croaking persisted, as if the sounds were being transmitted from the icy depths below their feet. Panicked, they fled back to the sanctuary of the crew's quarters. Over the coming nights, other team members reported being shaken from their bedrooms by thunderous booming rhythmically reverberating through the ice. A few spoke of discerning melodic undertones amid the cacophony, reminiscent of ancient tribal chants. Perhaps most unnerving were the scratching noises. Hundreds of skittering vibrations swarming across the ice crust, akin to grotesque fingernails breaking against glass. The unsettling sounds seemed to track the motion of anyone who dared venture outside at night. Despite round-the-clock monitoring, the source of the phenomena eluded the team's sensors. Temperature, seismic and electromagnetic readings all fluctuated wildly, yet detected nothing but the vast frozen stillness surrounding them. Those inclined toward rationality grasped at fraying strands of scientific logic to explain the disturbances. Tectonic shifts, migratory wildlife, rear, wind effects, any remotely plausible rationale to cling to dwindling resolve. For increasingly fewer initiated members, the realization took hold that they had roused something primordial and inexplicable. A potent, malicious force intent on defending its ancestral domain from the upstart intruders invading hallowed grounds. The disquieting phenomenon tormenting the 𝗪𝗀 had now metastasized into a full-blown siege by malevolent, otherworldly forces. As the researchers' grip on reality became increasingly tenuous, it was only a matter of time before the haunting manifested into the incontrovertible. The first admission of an apparent sighting came from a young biologist out collecting ice samples one hazy morning. Through the dense fog, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a vaguely human-like silhouette drifting across the frozen expanse. When he froze in his tracks, the amorphous shape seemed to twist unnaturally before dissipating into the gloom. Assuming it to be little more than a trick of light and exhaustion, his unnerved account was dismissed by the senior scientists, eager to avoid any hint of hysteria. That all changed a few nights later when the entire night crew beheld a congregating throng of pale, luminous forms coalescing in the distance. Nebulous and indistinct, the eerie assemblage drifted about the camp's perimeter, their faintly glowing outline suggesting twisted, humanoid shapes. Attempts to investigate the anomaly via equipment and vehicles proved fruitless, as the figures always remained on the edge of visual perception. Yet, any time a crew member attempted to approach, an overwhelmingly sense of dread compelled them to retreat back to the supposed safety of the ice bunkers. The credible witnesses and rigorous logs documenting these events could no longer be ignored. Whatever malign forces were haunting Lake Baikal were now overtly manifesting in the physical realm. What were these disturbing specters? The tortured souls of those who had perished on the lake over the centuries? Or something far more ancient and sinister? The indigenous legends spoke of the Khozryain, the jealous primordial guardians, who mercilessly defended Baikal from outsiders. Had the harrowing expedition finally breached their haunted realm of jealously guarded secrets? Beset by the relentless onslaught of paranormal activity, the researchers knew their only hope of survival lay in unraveling the dark truths underlying the indigenous legends. If they were to have any chance of appeasing or combating the forces besieging them, They needed to understand exactly what malevolent entities held sway over Baikal's frozen realm. Leading the charge was a young anthropologist named 𝗪𝗸𝗲, whose expertise in Siberian tribal folklore proved invaluable. Poring over dusty archives and interviewing the region's eldest shaman elders, she began piecing together the fragmented clues from the past. Her findings painted a chilling picture of an ancient, primordial culture that had arisen along the shores of Baikal not long after the last ice age. Known as the Baikal ancestors, this isolated proto-civilization existed for thousands of years in symbiotic reverence with the sacred sea and its deified nature spirits, chief among them the dreaded Khozryain. According to the elders' tales, the Khozryain were volatile, shape-shifting deities who dwelled in the inky depths, eternally guarding the sacred waters from any who disrespected Baikal's sanctity. Those unfortunate enough to cross the Khozryain faced a dire fate, their souls forever ensnared beneath the ice, to swell the grim ranks of the entity's restless armies. 𝗪's most disturbing revelation centered upon an ancient ritual conducted every century, when the omens and elemental chaos heralded the Khozryain's reawakening. In a gruesome rite, tribal elders sacrificed the souls of their defiled and sinful to satiate the wrathful deities, forestalling their judgment upon the land for another 100 revolutions of the seasons. As the endless nights grew darker and colder, the researchers came to a grim realization. The unprecedented drilling and defilement of the sacred lake had not only roused the Khozryain from their primeval slumber. The violation was perceived as unforgivable. Nothing short of sacrifice would appease their wrath, lest all their souls be eternally damned. The 𝗕:beleaguered the Baikal ice cap that reached the very brink of madness. Their futile attempts to rationalize or escape the relentless haunting proved as ineffectual as the fraying threads of their sanity. It was on one particularly harrowing night that the veil between realms was torn asunder. All delusions of retaining control over their spectral plight were shattered in a single, bone-chilling moment. The unearthly sounds, phantasmal apparitions, and pervasive dread had been the precursors, mere warnings of the ineffable malice about to be unleashed upon the wretched trespassers. It began with a thunderous boom ripping across the camp, a concussive force shattering every pane of reinforced glass. The scientists scrambled for the emergency shelter just as the ice surface surrounding them began violently undulating. Fissures and chasms sheared open with gut-wrenching shrieks of rending ice. From these eldritch maws erupted roiling plumes of ethereal fog, cascading across the camp in a freezing miasma. Within the unnatural vapor swirling vortices, humanoid figures began coalescing, grotesque, twisted silhouettes dripping with rime and malice. Their mouths contorted in voiceless agonies, eternally howling the atrocious secrets of the deep. All around echoed the vengeful shrieks and guttural croakings. The voices of the Khozryain spirits, the deified guardians, who had spoken at last to their defilers. Their baleful shrieks thundered across the ice-scape. Your idolatrous trespasses have been weighed. Your mortal arrogance has stripped you of penance. Prepare to have your souls rended asunder and subsumed into our infinite, vengeful host. The vengeful spirits fell upon the shambolic remains of the research station, their countless forms swarming from fissure to unholy fissure. The hour of reckoning was at hand, as the Eldritch Khozryain vented their primal rage upon the interlopers who had profaned their sacrosanct dominion. Huddled in the reinforced ice bunker, the last survivors of the doomed expedition watched in abject horror as the vengeful Khozryain unleashed their fury upon the ravaged camp. Merciless, they ripped apart every structure, flinging debris across the ice-scape amid anguished howls of rage. 𝗪𝗸𝗲𝗍𝗪, the anthropologist, whose dark revelations had illuminated their grave transgression, fought to maintain her composure. If there was to be any hope of placating the deific guardians, the ancient rites and lore would need to guide them. Gathering what few remained with a semblance of resolve, she relayed the grim truth. The Khozryain demanded untold ages of profane indignities be atoned through the most brutal of sacrifices, the utter obliteration of their immortal souls. A ritual slaughter to appease the rampant deities and forestall their eternal damnation. As the thunderous screams penetrated the frozen sanctuary, the decision became achingly clear. Fight and be subsumed into oblivion at the hands of the implacable guardians, or enact the rites in blind faith that the Khozryain's judgment could somehow be forestalled. With no other options remaining, the surviving scientists gathered the meager tools needed to conduct the ancient rites of penance. Chanting the arcane verses by the sickly light of handheld lanterns, they commenced the profane ceremonies to commune with Baikal's terrible deities. The discordant harmonics reverberated through the fractured ice, ushering forth billowing miasmas of vapor from the rifts. Amorphous shapes began swirling amid the ethereal fog, silently observing the feeble mortal's plaintive offering of repentance. Then came the soul-rending shrieks, the visceral, damning roars of the Khozryain as their final judgment boomed across the forsaken realm of ice. Were the deific guardians accepting the ritual invocations and sacrifice, or merely venting their scorn before obliterating the last wretched remnants of the unhallowed trespassers? All that remained was to make peace with their unfathomable fate at the hands of the primal lake deities. For in the haunted depths of Baikal, the fury of the ancient Khozryain reigned supreme.
The frantic rituals and sacrifices enacted by the doomed researchers seemed to have an effect on the frenzied Khozryain, but not one any could have anticipated. Rather than accepting the mortal's penance, the deific entities appeared, amused. Malicious laughter echoing from unseen maws reverberated across the fractured ice. Then, a harrowing voice, ancient and bone-chillingly cruel, rang out, silencing all other eldritch shrieks and howls in deference. It spoke in perfect Russian, lacing each incomprehensible word with contempt and unholy power. You wretched beings deluded enough to profane these hallowed grounds. You flee from our righteous judgment while clinging to quaint superstitions of appeasement. How utterly, deliciously naive, frozen in sheer primal terror, the scientists could only listen as their damnation was proclaimed by the Khozryain's sovereign voice. Its revelation cast an unholy pall upon the very underpinnings of all they had known, or thought to know, about the haunted realm of Lake Baikal. We are not the mere spirits or deities of your feeble folklore and legends, deluded mortals. Our primordial shadow has endured since before your ancestors first rambled from the primeval muck, carried on the wings of the deceiver, evolution. The eldritch voice grew louder, shaking the bunker's foundations with its malefic reverberations. We are infinite, undying, the eternal and ostracized progeny of the great old ones, cursed with insatiable hunger for the very marrow of your souls by those whose true names you cannot comprehend. Banished eons ago to this wretched yet bountiful abyss to slake our famished cravings on those foolish enough to stumble blindly into our subterranean cosmos. Wave after wave of guttural, inhuman laughter assailed their psyches as the full extent of the abomination sank in. These malign entities were neither deific nor demonic by any known conception. They were far, far worse than the feeble human minds could possibly fathom. Prepare to have your very being extinguished, your anguished remnants subsumed into our eternal depths. Only then will your souls truly understand the futility of your tragic existence. The fate now awaiting them was unfathomably worse than the sacrificial obliteration they had feared, for they were to be unmade by metaphysical monstrosities with hungers that would make even oblivion recoil.
The revelation of the Khozryain's true, cosmic horror nature shattered what little remaining sanity the expedition survivors still clung to. These entities were far more than mere mythical deities or vengeful spirits. They were an eternal, eldritch blight upon all of creation itself, pent up for eons within the abyssal depths, sacred Baikal. They now intended to unmake reality itself by consuming the very souls of the interlopers who dared breach their primordial realm. Death was an inadequate concept to describe the utter obliteration that awaited as the inhuman shrieks and poundings increased in intensity. The skeletal remains of the research team hungered in the fractured ice bunker. All pretense of rationality or scientific detachment had been eradicated, replaced by the desperate, primal instinct for self-preservation. 𝗪𝗛𝗪𝗶𝗀𝗍, the anthropologist who had plumbed the darkest depths of the ancient lore, saw the truth laid bare at last. There could be no appeasement, no bargaining with such far transcendent abominations against nature. The only path forward was one of reverence and respect. Gathering what few shards of courage remained, she raised her arms to the malefic miasma swirling through the ruined camp. When she spoke, her words rang with a clarity and power that stunned her battered comrades. Ancients of the infinite void, eldritch progeny of the great old ones whose true names cannot be uttered, We renounce our transgressions upon your hallowed cosmic realm, as if in response, the shrieks and poundings momentarily ebb. You're pressed on. We are but blind, ignorant creatures who have profaned your slumbering kingdom through our idolatrous ambitions. We submit ourselves to your infinite judgment and metaphysical supremacy. A deafening, pregnant silence now fell over the haunted expanse. Even the unearthly glow of the Khozryain's manifestation seemed to dim in contemplation of the mortal's supplication. Then, the cruel, implacable voice rang out once more, though slightly more measured than before. Your pathetic groveling amuses us, little souling. Perhaps there is a modicum of wisdom in your wretched species after all. Relinquish your idolatries and false empirical hubris. Abandon this tainted realm, and you may yet be permitted the mercy of oblivion. Cross our cosmic threshold again, and your extinction will be absolute. As the harrowing ultimatum lingered in the frosted air, the survivors saw their only path forward. They must flee this forsaken place, destroying every scrap of data and knowledge attained through their accursed trespass. The haunted ice of Lake Baikal would forever remain the inviolate, cosmically veiled dominion of the Eldritch Khozryain. The eerie, unnatural silence blanketing the ravaged ice cap was more unnerving than the cacophony of shrieks and poundings unleashed by the merciless Khozryain. Having issued their ominous ultimatum, the Eldritch entities seemed to have withdrawn into the metaphysical abyss. For now, Yrah and the handful of survivors moved with trembling urgency, packing what few essentials could be salvaged. Their instructions were twofold: flee the haunted ice as swiftly as their mortal existences would allow, and destroy every shred of data and evidence from their idolatrous incursion. The hard drives, samples, recordings, all were smashed into oblivion or consigned to the rifts gouged into the icescape. Not a single fragment could remain to draw the inscrutable wrath of the Ancient Ones slumbering beneath. As the demolition of their work progressed, each soul was pervaded by an existential dread beyond the shock of their supernatural torment. A far more profound epiphany had taken hold. If such cosmic forces as the Khozryain truly did reign, was all of reality as they understood it a lie? A flimsy facade over the true, indescribable underpinnings of creation? Such questions could not be dwelled upon unless minds be irrevocably splintered. All that mattered was purging this haunted realm of their profane trespass and escaping with what tattered sanity remained. Abandoning their drills, sensors, and heavy equipment, the haggard few, laden with mere personal effects, turned westward toward the distant shoreline. For hours they trekked in profound silence, their path illuminated only by the wan glow of hand-cranked lanterns. Every footfall brought them further from the abyss, yet the psychic rhyme of the Khozryain's malefic influence still clung like a spectral miasma. It was only after nightfall, when the faintest hint of civilization twinkled in the distance like a divine beacon, that the full crushing weight of their experience began to lift. Yara looked back towards the darkling ice one last time, straining to see any lingering sign of the cosmic abominations lurking beneath. Yet all that could be discerned was the boundless, frigid void. The haunted realm of the Khozryain had relinquished them from its inscrutable grasp. For now, for all who survived carried the seeds of its dark revelation, germinating as an unspeakable blight that could never be truly escaped or purged. And so we reach the end of our tale, a chronicle of cosmic dread and the folly of mortal hubris. For those few who escaped the haunted ice, their lives became a waking nightmare from which there could be no deliverance. Every shadow held an echo of the eldritch shrieks that still reverberated through their waking minds. Each dream was tainted by fevered visions of the Khozryain's endless laughter echoing across the infinite void. The existential dread they had glimpsed behind reality's fraying veil could never be unseen or unfelt. Some sought refuge by disappearing into the wilderness to live as hermits, shunning all aspects of civilization that may foster further profane knowledge. Others took their own lives to escape the unrelenting psychological torment. The sole survivor known to have embraced a semblance of a normal life was the anthropologist 𝗪𝗸𝗪𝗀. Yet even she remained forever altered, a mere husk of her former self, beset by night terrors, in an inescapable foreboding that the Khozryain's unfathomable influence would inevitably return. On her deathbed nearly 60 years later, Yara's final whispering request spoke volumes of the indelible scars left by her encounter with the ancient ones of the infinite void. With one trembling, skeletal hand, she implored her children to gather every photograph, artifact, and scrap of research from her fateful expedition, and cast it all into her pyre so that no trace would remain. Only in the ashes of all tainted relics could the curse finally be broken, she desperately hoped. Though in her soul Yara knew such profound revelations could never be unmade or unseen, for the haunted realms of our world were far more numerous than the fevered minds of humanity could ever comprehend. So let this warning be embraced, dear listeners. Leave the haunted places to slumber undisturbed. For there are realms never meant for mortal perception, where eldritch monstrosities far more malign than any nightmare still linger, waiting for the uninitiated to stray across the threshold of insanity.